And let's begin with Back to the Future, the Steven Spielberg production, which has broken box office records all over America and will, I suspect, do much the same thing here. It's an engaging, hugely entertaining story of a small-town American teenager, Michael J. Fox.
Remember that time Marty McFly strolled across a parking lot with Jennifer on his arm, 48 hours after becoming the first human being in history to travel through time, looking like a guy who just had a pretty good weekend? He saved his parents' marriage, he saved Doc's life, he saved his own existence, and now he's walking to his truck. Except it isn't actually his truck, and it isn't the same parking lot. And the sign above the entrance, the one weird detail that changes everything once you see it, is proof that Marty McFly never actually made it back to the same 1985 he left. I bet you've never noticed the sign in the background of this scene. No one has. But it appears only twice in the movie, and how it shows up changes everything you think you know about it. At the start of the film, that sign reads Twin Pines Mall. At the end, it reads Lone Pine Mall. One tiny detail, an entire universe of meaning. And today we're breaking down the 8 different ways that meaning shows up in the movie, each one a little weirder than the last. By the time we get to number 1, the ending of Back to the Future is never going to feel quite the same again. Let's get into it. Number 8, Marty doesn't ask a single question, and that's the strangest thing in the film. The first place this shows up is the most uncomfortable one, and it's hiding inside the moment that's supposed to feel the best. When Marty gets back to 1985 and finds his family transformed, father confident and successful, mother happy and healthy, Biff waxing their car in the driveway like a man who knows his place, Marty doesn't ask a single question. He looks around at this upgraded version of his life and just takes it in, pleased, relieved, satisfied. He doesn't ask his father when the writing career started. He doesn't ask his mother what changed. He doesn't look at Biff, the man who spent years walking into their house uninvited and pushing his father around, and say, "What happened to you?" Now here's what's strange about that. When Marty left 1985, his father was a broken man. His mother was unhappy. Biff ran the house. Marty knew all of this. He lived it. And yet he comes back to find every single one of those things reversed. And he asks nothing. One possible explanation is that he's simply too relieved to question it. He's been holding his own existence together for 2 days straight. Maybe he just doesn't want to look too closely at a good thing. But the more unsettling possibility, the one the film never confirms but quietly leaves open, is that there's nothing left to question. That the version of Marty who came home already carries this new history inside him as if it was always there. That the mechanism of the timeline change didn't just rewrite the world around him, it rewrote him. The film doesn't tell you which it is. It just shows you a kid who should have questions and doesn't have any, and leaves you to sit with that. Number 7. The family transformation is too complete to be comfortable. Let's look at exactly what changed, because the scale of it matters. On the morning of October 26, 1985, the morning Marty left, George McFly is a broken man. His high school supervisor, Biff Tannen, bullied him into submission at age 17, and he never recovered. He lets Biff walk into his home uninvited, drink his beer, damage his car, and speak to him like he's nothing. He has no professional ambition, no confidence, no apparent sense of his own worth. He is, in the language of the film, a complete wimp. Lorraine drinks too much. She is not a happy woman. When Marty returns, his father is a published science fiction author. His books are on display in the living room. Biff is in the driveway saying yes sir and no sir and buffing the car with a rag. The house is bigger, the furniture is better. The whole material and emotional texture of the family has been transformed. This happened because of one moment. In 1955, at the Enchantment Under the Sea dance, George McFly punched Biff Tannen in the face to protect Lorraine. One punch. One moment of courage that the original George McFly never had, in a confrontation that Marty engineered to save his own existence. That single moment compounded across 30 years into an entirely different man. A man who believed in himself, a man who wrote books, a man whose wife was happy. Marty caused that. He built the situation, stepped back, and watched his father become someone he never was. The family he came home to has the same faces, the same names, the same love for him. They are not the same people. Number 6, Doc Brown walked into his own shooting on purpose. This is where the film reveals a completely different story running underneath the one you think you're watching. In 1955, Marty gives Doc a letter. The letter is a warning. In 1985, the Libyan terrorists will shoot him in the Twin Pines Mall parking lot on the night of the time travel demonstration. Doc reads the first few lines, then tears the letter to pieces. He tells Marty he cannot know too much about his own future. It might compromise the timeline. It is played as a principled decision. A scientist refusing to put his own survival above the integrity of time itself. Then Marty returns to 1985. The terrorists arrive. They shoot Doc. Doc stands up. He reaches into his coat and pulls out the letter, taped back together, every fragment of it carefully and completely reassembled. And he grins. He read it. He tore it up in front of Marty, discarded the pieces, and then at some point went back, collected every scrap, and put it back together to read the words he'd already pretended to destroy. We don't know exactly when he did that. Could have been the next day, could have been years later. But at some point, before that night in 1985, Doc Brown read the letter and learned he was going to be shot. And then he bought a bulletproof vest, showed up anyway, and let it happen. He could have moved. He could have canceled the demonstration. He could have warned Marty not to come. Instead, he positioned himself correctly and let every second of that night unfold exactly as the letter described. The most reasonable reading of that choice is that Doc understood, even if the film never states it directly, that the events of that night were what sent Marty to 1955, which was what changed the McFly family, which was what made all of it worth doing. He chose the timeline over his own safety. Doc Brown walked into his own shooting on purpose. That is not a supporting character doing comic relief. That is a man running a story of quiet, private courage underneath the film you've been watching the whole time. Number 5, Doc manipulated the timeline just as much as Marty did. Now here's where the film's own logic starts to turn on itself. The central anxiety of the 1955 sequences is interference. Every choice Marty makes in the past risks consequences he can't predict or control. Doc spends half the film warning him about it. The Lone Pine Mall sign is proof the anxiety was justified. Marty changed things without meaning to, things that rippled forward 30 years. But Doc did it too, and he did it deliberately. By reading the letter, by knowing he would be shot and preparing for it, Doc changed the outcome of that night. In the version of events where the letter stays torn up and unread, Doc dies in that parking lot. Marty escapes in the DeLorean and travels to 1955. Everything follows from that. But in the version where Doc reads the letter and survives, the night plays out differently. Doc is alive. He's standing there with the taped-together letter, already planning the modifications that will send him and the DeLorean to 1885. That's a different outcome, a changed timeline, produced by Doc acting on information Marty sent him from the future. The man who spent the entire 1955 section of the film warning Marty about the dangers of changing things was simultaneously, quietly, doing exactly that. He just did it carefully enough that you weren't watching him do it. The principle he handed Marty in 1955 didn't survive the night any more than the original McFly family did. Doc knew that. He taped the letter back together anyway. Number 4. The film never asks what happened to the other Marty. This is the one the film never goes near, and it's worth sitting with even if there's no clean answer. If the McFly family was genuinely transformed by what Marty did in 1955, if George became a successful author, if Lorraine became happy, if the whole household changed from the moment of that punch at the enchantment under the sea dance, then the Marty who grew up in that household would be a different person. He had a different childhood, a father who believed in himself from day one, a mother who wasn't retreating into unhappiness, a stability that the original Marty never had. That version of Marty would have been living his life in October 1985, going to school, playing guitar, existing inside the better timeline that our Marty's interference created, And then our Marty came back from 1955. The film doesn't tell us what happens to the other one. It doesn't address the question at all. Time travel films rarely do because there's no tidy answer. But the question sits right in the middle of the happy ending, whether the film acknowledges it or not. Somewhere in the logic of this story, there's a version of Marty McFly who grew up with every advantage our Marty accidentally created, and who wasn't there when our Marty pulled into the driveway. The film gives you the truck and the music and the good feeling. It just never quite accounts for him. Number 3. The mall sign is not an Easter egg. It's the evidence. Now we come back to the sign. Twin Pines Mall at the beginning. Lone Pine Mall at the end. One word different on a sign that's on screen for 2 seconds during the sequence designed to make you feel the best you've felt in the entire film. Everything in numbers 8 through 4 is interpretation. It's logic applied to the film's own rules. A viewer building a case from what the movie suggests, but never states directly. The mall sign is different. The mall sign is a fact. Here's what happened. When Marty crashed through Peabody's fence in 1955 and tore across his farm in the DeLorean, he ran over one of Peabody's pine trees. Peabody had 2, now he had 1. When Peabody eventually sold that land, the developers who built the mall named it after what was there. One pine tree, Lone Pine Mall. It's not a metaphor. It's not symbolic. It's a direct, physical, cause and effect consequence of something Marty did while panicking and trying not to get shot by a farmer in a bathrobe. A 3-second moment in 1955 changed a sign in 1985 that Marty walked right past without reading. And that's the point. If a 3-second accident Marty barely registered changed a sign he never looked at, what did the important moments change? The ones where he spent days deliberately interfering with people's lives and choices and futures. If the pine tree becomes Lone Pine Mall, if that's what a small, unintended consequence looks like, what does 30 years of George McFly believing in himself look like? The sign is the visible edge of something much larger that the film keeps mostly out of frame. It's showing you the shape of the iceberg by showing you the tip. 2 seconds, 1 word, 40 years of rewatches. Number 2, Zemeckis and Gale. Confirmed the sign was deliberate. Here's where the interpretation gets some solid ground under it. Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, who wrote the screenplay together, who spent 4 years fighting to get it made, who had final say over every frame of the finished film, have confirmed in interviews that the Lone Pine Mall detail was intentional, not a continuity error, not a happy accident, written into the script as a deliberate signal that the timeline had changed and that the world Marty returned to was not the world he left. That's what they confirmed. The sign was placed on purpose. It means something. What exactly it implies about memory, identity, and the version of Marty who came home, that part they've left open. That's where the interpretation begins and the confirmed fact ends. But the foundation is solid. 1 word on a sign in the background of the final scene, put there by the writers to tell you something the film never says out loud. They put it there in 1984. It's still there. It was always there. The question was only ever whether you were looking at the right part of the frame. Number 1. Why Marty can never know. And this is where we land. Here's what the film confirms. Marty returned to a 1985 where the mall has a different name, where his father is a completely different man, where 30 years of history unfolded differently because of what Marty did in 1955. That's not theory, that's on screen. Here's what the film leaves open. Whether Marty knows any of this, whether he remembers the original version of his family, whether the mechanism of the timeline change left him with any anchor to what was real before he left. The film never tells us, and that silence is the most interesting thing about it. Because if Marty remembers, if somewhere underneath the good feeling he carries the memory of the failing father, and the unhappy mother, and the smaller house, then the happy ending is complicated in one way. He knows what he changed. He lives with that knowledge. But if he doesn't remember, if the new history settled into him the way it settled into everyone else, if there's no version of the old life left anywhere he can reach, then the ending is complicated in a completely different way. He earned something real. He fought for it. He He held his own existence together across an impossible weekend and came out the other side. And the life he came out into is genuinely better. He just has no way of knowing it wasn't always there. Zemeckis and Gale put a sign in the background of that final scene that points at this without explaining it. One word different. The smallest possible proof of the largest possible question. Marty strolls across that parking lot with Jennifer on his arm, looking like a guy who just had a pretty good weekend. He saved his parents' marriage. He saved Doc's life. He saved his own existence. And he's not living in his original timeline anymore, and he never can again. And there it is, 8 ways that one weird detail shows up in Back to the Future, and 8 reasons why the ending of this film hits different once you've seen them. Now I want to know, when did you actually first notice the sign? First viewing, 10th viewing, or just now? Tell us in the comments. And if you know someone who thinks they've seen this film front to back and caught everything, send them this video. Let's find out. Subscribe if you want more of this. Every week we come back to the films that made us and look at what's actually inside them. Until next time, this is Remember That Time. I'll save your spot on the couch.